The US ambassador to Israel has told Sky News that he knows of no plans by his country to launch military strikes against Iran. That's despite President Trump having said he's considering such an intervention in support of mass protests against the regime. Ambassador Mike Huckabee sat down with our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons.
What kind of active role do you anticipate the United States playing in trying, I assume from your perspective, to try to hasten regime change?
I don't think it's something the United States is actively engaged in trying to hasten anything. It's a matter of respect, and this is how President Trump has framed it. He certainly wants there to be recognition that the government of Iran should not murder its own people, should not injure them and hurt them because they're protesting. They have a right to protest, and they're protesting about legitimate things.
So are you ruling out a military attack by the United States or indeed by your great ally Israel on Iran?
I don't think that right now the U.S. or Israel is making plans to engage. I don't know what may happen. I simply don't know. I would be totally out of my league if I said, here's what will happen. We don't know.
Would it be your estimation that a missile strike now could have colossal consequences and is not worth the political and humanitarian risk?
Yeah, and frankly, those are decisions that are going to be made in Washington by the president, by the Secretary of War. But I'm not hearing anything at this point where America is preparing to engage militarily. If they change their mind, I'm sure they'll tell us all. But right now, it's really a matter of watching what is an organic movement coming up from very, very disgruntled, rightfully so, Iranian people who have decided that they can't keep going on like this.
A lot of people look at American foreign policy right now and see this Domro doctrine, which they interpret as might is right, that America flexing its muscles militarily, threatening Greenland, taking Maduro. How does that play out in the Middle East here? To what extent are we still going to look for America flexing military muscles in order to try to achieve diplomatic objectives?
I think we have a president that would rather never use military power. He would just rather never having to deploy it. But he's also a president that's not a chump. He's not going to watch people slaughtered. He will intervene when it's necessary, and he will deal with those who do horrific things.
Ambassador, here you're of course based in Jerusalem. This isn't just about America, it's also about Israel, looking at Iran. Both of you have had, of course, huge diplomatic roles with Iran in conflict. To what extent are you working hand in glove with Israeli intelligence in formulating plans for Iran?
I think it would be a false calculation to say that America and Israel are working on plans for Iran. What we are doing is certainly working together to review and to understand what the people of Iran are doing and to gauge with great interest this revolt of the people who have every right to be fed up with the Iranian regime.
I want to ask you about Gaza. When we do get back the final hostage, the remains of the final hostage, and we enter into the second phase, a key component of that is, of course, this board of peace, which will be chaired by President Trump. Who else will be on that board? And particularly, will Tony Blair still be involved?
I don't know. I mean, it's going to be announced when it's ready. I think we all thought it might have already been announced, but one of the things that I appreciate about the process is it could have been done quickly, but there's a greater desire to do it right than to do it fast.
And what does that mean? What does do it right? Because lots of people look at this and say, do it right means Palestinians having control of Gaza.
There will be a Palestinian technocratic government. That's part of the peace plan that President Trump has outlined. Who is on that is yet to be named and determined. And that process, I know, is intense, and it's going on every single day.
And is your anticipation that Palestinians, that Gazans, get back all of Gaza?
I think that's the ultimate plan. I don't think Israel has ambitions to live in Gaza, to establish anything there. But I'll tell you what they do have absolute convictions about. They don't want another October the 7th. They'll maintain the border, and they won't allow something like that to happen to them again.
And as you know, Britain, France, many other countries have now recognized a state of Palestine. That is something that you objected to, but it's considered normal, everyday diplomatic opinion by so many countries now. Why are they all wrong?
It wasn't just me. My government, the United States, has been vehemently opposed to this unilateral recognition. It was to us not only ill-timed, it was very damaging and hurtful to the process in Gaza. It was damaging to what we were trying to do in alleviating some of the financial crisis between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I'm not sure to this day what was accomplished by it other than to really mess some things up that didn't need to be messed up, and for some grandstanding to go on between some European leaders that thought that somehow they were going to bring some great resolve, which they did not do.
It's Ambassador Mike Huckabee speaking to our Adam Parsons, and Adam joins me live now from Jerusalem. Adam, great interview. Just referencing back to the conversation you had with him about Iran and all options being on the table. He seemed to play down the idea of military strikes, but of course we keep hearing that behind the scenes the Trump administration is weighing up all options right now.
I think there's a twin track approach going on here, which is that they are putting plans in place for a military strike if that becomes their number one option. Right now, it isn't, but these things can change quickly. And you talk to any diplomat who's had anything to do with the United States over the past year, they will tell you that the mood of the White House, the mood of President Trump can change in the space of moments. Now, what is the calculus? I think right now, the Americans and indeed the Israelis would say, why would they attack Iran? What is to be gained and what could be lost? And it is point two, Yalda, which is really significant. What might you lose? Well, you might lose the support of the protesters, because last year when we had that war between Iran and Israel, and America struck Iran as well, there was a kind of feeling of people rallying around the flag, and that in a sense made them rally around the regime. I think there's fears from the Israelis and really very profoundly from the Americans that if they attack now, it could be completely counterproductive. So I think they want to sit on the sidelines and see how these protests start to manifest themselves, if they move the dial, if the regime seems to be in danger of toppling. But what could change that calculation is probably if they see an increasing number of civilian casualties. That is something that Mike Huckabee pointed to when we spoke earlier. I think if you started to see signs, and of course we already know there are hundreds of people who have been killed in these protests, but if you start seeing, and Huckabee's word was slaughter on the street, I think at that point he felt that President Trump would be compelled to act. Now, at the moment, there does seem to be a mood that J.D. Vance, the vice president, is strongly against military action at this moment, that Donald Trump is slightly more vacillating between the strength of showing might in this conflict, something that, of course, he feels is important to him. But in this region, the underlying feeling at the moment, and I emphasize this is volatile, it's a rapidly developing situation, is that the best idea is to sit back, watch, give oxygen to these protesters, and to try to think of ways of supporting them. The one thing that lots of Western nations have learned in recent years is that if they get involved, that doesn't necessarily hasten regime change, and if it does, then it doesn't particularly help long-term change. And when I said to Huckabee, well, what do you want to see next? Who would you want to see running Iran if the Ayatollah and his regime were to go? Then he said that would be down to the people. That is not something that America would wish to choose. Well, as we've known, over many decades, America has picked leaders. It hasn't always worked out well. Right now, America is standing on the sidelines. But goodness me, if there's one thing we've learned over the past 12 months, it is that the truth right now isn't necessarily the truth around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam, just, this is potentially an election year in Israel. And when I've spoken to diplomats in the region and, security officials and the establishment in Israel, they're also alluding to the fact that perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu, is encouraging Donald Trump to launch some kind of strike in Iran, because whenever Benjamin Netanyahu has gone after Iran or Lebanon, his approval rating goes back up. So in a sort of more sinister way, for Benjamin Netanyahu in an election year, he needs to see these sorts of flare-ups in places like Iran and Lebanon, because it does help him domestically as well.
There's no doubt that Benjamin Netanyahu, an extraordinarily successful politician in terms of longevity, you can draw that parallel between military success and the projection of Israeli power and his popularity. And Benjamin Netanyahu, as he heads towards a general election later this year, needs a boost in the polls. He also has people in his cabinet who are very keen to see action, who are hawkish about Israel's right to respond to attack, and of course who look at Iran as being a sworn enemy of the state of Israel, as being a nation that simply does not want Israel to exist, which has bankrolled Hezbollah, which has bankrolled the Houthis, and of course has bankrolled Hamas. So there are many in Israel who consider Iran and the Iranian regime in particular to be their ultimate enemy. Netanyahu is a political conjurer, and he will know that to his right, and that is the growing area of Israeli politics, there are those who would like to see them strike Iran when it's weak. His only problem with that is A, the Americans could resist, and B, he knows that if that attack goes wrong, it may do exactly the same thing we talked about earlier. It might embolden the regime, it may detract and distract the protest, and could be counterproductive. But make no mistake, there are people close to him who want him to attack.
Adam, thank you as always for all of your analysis there.